giant iceberg?
Basically, yeah, right? A bunch of frozen water, and sometimes it sticks around for a year, sometimes it sticks around for 1,000 years, or far, far more. Glaciers are an important part of how land moves and changes, right? So when I think about like a valley, so I live in a valley. What forms valleys? What do we think forms valleys? Yeah, what do you think? Well, sometimes you're a step ahead of me, right? What do you normally think of as forming a valley? What formed the Grand Canyon? Yeah. Erosion, yeah, right? From a river moving through, right? So often, many of our valleys are bodies of water moving through, right? The Skagit Valley. So that long erosion from constantly moving water creates a valley. In some cases, like the valley I live in, there's no river there, right? And it was still the movement of water causing that. It just happened to be epically giant frozen water moving through that carved that valley out. And the Puget Sound behind us is the same way. So the glacier, so Puget Sound carved by a glacier over most recently about 15,000 years ago. And the glacier, they estimate, was about the height of 3 Space Needles, right? So it's about, I don't even know how high that is, 1,500 feet, something like that. Above us, right? So just about as far up as you could imagine. And that's what created the water body that we know now. And it happened over a few stages. So first, this is what our little world, our little area looked like about a little more than 15,000 years ago. And what do you see anything you recognize?
So this is Washington State.
Right, so you still see our basic form, but there's no Puget Sound. You can kind of tell the Olympic Peninsula, you can kind of sense where we are, right? And what you'll notice it says, what does it say, Penny?
It says Puget Sound lowland during the Olympia interglaciation.
Oh, interglaciation, so what does that mean? Yeah. Ah, well, it is, well, what is inter?
Right.
What is, yeah, well, no.
You're half right.
In the middle?
That's
Yeah, what do you think?
In the middle of?
In the middle of, right? In the middle of. You're meant to be a geologist. So in the middle of, so in between periods of glaciation, right? So we always talk around here about the glacier carves this, but in fact there have been a whole lot of periods of glaciers coming and going. And you know, they used to say there were four periods of glaciation. But as they do more research, they really don't know how many there's been. Because as that giant 3 tall Space Needles moves through, it's pretty much obliterating all the evidence of whatever glaciers came before, right? Imagine all that weight of that frozen water grinding along. So, you know, they don't know. There's somewhere between 4 and 20 periods of glaciation over the last couple 100,000 years that have really totally changed this landscape. So, that's what our world used to look like. And then a glacier started moving down, started advancing. And when we say the word advance, sometimes the glacier does move, right? Sometimes it's heavy enough that it's moving forward, but often it's also just water freezing in front of it. And what do you see happening there? Yeah. Ah, well, it's definitely, there's some erosion going on, but it's because of an interesting process. So, anybody know the Strait of Juan de Fuca? Right, that water body that separates, so we've got this water body up here. There's Vancouver Island, or what may one day become such a thing. Here's our Olympic Peninsula, and there's this big body of water here. And the glacier, the first thing it did was come in. Oh, and wait, and we see all these cute little rivers and creeks and streams. What may one day become something like the Skagit. You know, a lot of these rivers probably got changed in a big way over time, but
coming off the Cascade Mountains here and the Olympian Mountains here.
So there's constantly water pouring off of the landscape, right? And it used to go into the Strait of Juan de Fuca. And then came this glacier, and it blocked off the Strait of Juan de Fuca.
Right.
So all that water started pooling in the lowlands of what we now know today to be Puget Sound. But what's different about that water than the water that's here today? Yeah, it's fresh water, right? It's coming off of the rivers and streams from the mountains, right? So circa 12,000 years ago, Puget Sound was a big freshwater lake.
And remember when we were doing our rock cycle when we were on the way down here? So what are the rivers carrying with them?
Ah,
Keep that in the back of your mind. You don't have to go anywhere with that right now.
although, and the glacier just kept coming, right? It just kept advancing. And remember, sometimes that advancing really is the whole sheet of ice is moving forward, and sometimes it's just more water is freezing in front of it. And what's happening then is those rivers and streams that Penny was just talking about are bringing that sediment and dumping it into Puget Sound, as well as that glacier moves forward, as it's advancing, it's got a long-term trend of moving forward, but it's also got kind of a seasonal trend, right? It probably melts back a little bit in the summer, moves forward a little bit in the winter. Over the long term, it's still moving forward, right? But it does a little bit of back and forth, and that back and forth causes this sort of glacial outwash, sort of the glacier, whatever the crazy stuff, sediment it's picked up on its journey before, it's washing out and dumping into Puget Sound. So the result is this big lake starts getting filled in with sediment, right? And so this is about what scientists think the glacier looked like at its greatest extent. You can kind of see this is Gray's Harbor down here, what will one day become Gray's Harbor. This is just about the border with Oregon, so it covered a really big chunk of our whole state.
So what used to go out through the Strait of Juan de Fuca is now going out to the Pacific Ocean at the southern end.
And then over time, the climate changed a little bit and things started melting back. And as the glacier pulls back, right, you've got, it's sort of, remember, it's grinding, it's scraping its way back. And dumping out sediments while it does so, but it's starting to create kind of the outlines that we may one day recognize as Puget Sound. I see Hood Canal there, I see some things that are going to become Olympia, Squaxin Island. And remember, that's still fresh water in there, right? Because it's still just melted glacial water and water pouring in off the mountains and rivers. And then, when it melts back all the way past the Strait of Juan de Fuca, all of a sudden there's this giant pool of salt water known as the ocean that comes roaring back in. And that's sort of the big picture process of what made us Puget Sound today. Let's take a look at Puget Sound today. And we'll just see, ooh, it's windy. So where do you all live? Somewhere hereabouts?
Yeah, we're not on that.
What do you mean?
You should be on.
I'm
You're on
in
that.
Duval. I bet you're west of
Okay,
Duval.
You're in
Come
Duval?
on.
Samantha's just like right there.
Come on over.
Right, and
Somebody
the
come on
reason-
over and show me where your school is. Come on over. You're perfect.
Near Lake
Come on
Washington.
over.
Give me a hand.
So that's Seattle. There you go. So there's Kirkland, right? Your school
Yes.
near Kirkland?
It is.
Right, so there you are.
Great. So, and we are right here, right, looking out over Puget Sound. So, and yeah, you can see kind of and that's the reason that Puget Sound looks so sort of awkward how it does, right? Is you imagine a glacier coming in, imagine over 100,000 years, this happening a bunch of times in a row, but a glacier coming in and grinding its way through and pulling back out. And that's our picture here. And one of the things that's done is, what do you notice? You all live near Lake Sammamish. You probably know Lake Washington pretty well. You know that we're right in front of the Puget Sound. What do you notice about the sort of direction and form of those water bodies?
Which direction are they running? All of them.
Down,
Up and down?
being
Down
south,
being-
right?
Yeah. So north and south, right? Which is the way the glaciers advanced, and they scour this out in potentially existing river valleys, and not only the scouring of the ice, but the weight of that ice. So behind us, Puget Sound can be as deep as 200 feet in some areas, and that was because the pressure and the weight of the glacier actually pushed the earth down underneath of it, and it still rebounded day from the last glacier. So it actually gets a little bit showered each and every year by increments, tiny increments.
And so you notice that a lot in the landforms around here, that they run north and south, whether they're deep, deep lakes or sounds, or whether they're mountain ranges, or whether they're hills. They tend to run north and south, and the valleys tend to be sort of north and south. I know this because I ride my bike most of the places I go, and if I'm riding north, it's usually pretty easy, and if I try to ride east or west, it's usually pretty hellish. So,
Did you say hillish?
yes, of course I
Very
did.
hellish.
Awesome. So, right in, and so we can't, so don't underestimate the power of that giant, giant glacier, 3 space needles tall, scouring its way through, and as it pulls back out, dumping all sorts of, sometimes people call it garbage soil, right? Everything it picked up from thousands of miles, everything that came flowing in on the rivers and got frozen in that glacier for thousands of years. As the glacier pulls back, it's pouring all that out. And that is a lot of the soil that we have today. And we'll talk about that in a minute. But first, we got to get down there. And I want us to get down there as glaciers. So we are all one glacier. So as we walk down this beach and head this way, use your feet to scour the land below you.